Welcome to MLA Formatting Basics. At its heart, this presentation is from Purdue University's online writing lab, which is also known as the Purdue OWL. When I have a question about formatting or citing a source, I always go to the OWL. There are three basic formatting guides. The APA, or American Psychology Association, is the guide used by Maths and Sciences. The Chicago Manual of Style is the rulebook for journalism, and the MLA, or Modern Language Association, governs publications in the humanities, which include English, history, and government. APA and MLA are fairly similar. As you advance in your college career, you'll eventually have to use both style guides. Formatting guides, like MLA, regulate document format, in-text citations, and the works cited list. The goal of formatting is uniformity. Every MLA formatted paper should look alike. While that may seem boring, it makes it easier for the reader to follow your reasoning and keeps the focus on your ideas. The basic formatting rule for any paper is to always follow your instructor's guidelines. I'm a real stickler about MLA. However, I have some preferences about it too. For example, while MLA allows Arial 12-point font, I require you to use Times New Roman only. Everything I'm about to tell you is within MLA specifications, but it's also specifically how I want your papers to look. The first week of class, you were supposed to look over the resources page and familiarize yourself with MLA formatting. However, some of us skipped that part, so I'm going to go over the basics here. An MLA style paper should be double-spaced with no space after the paragraph. To set the spacing in Word, on the Home tab, click this up and down arrow icon with the four horizontal lines. On the drop-down menu, click 2.0 to double space. On this same drop-down menu, make sure to select Remove Space After Paragraph. Word defaults to add the space. You already know how I feel about Times New Roman 12-point font. Use it always and only. There should be one space between words and following every kind of punctuation. There should never be a space between a word and the punctuation following it. You need 1-inch margins all the way around. And the first line of every paragraph should be indented 1/2 inch. To do this, you need to be able to see the ruler. So click the View tab and check the ruler box. On the ruler, move the top half of the guide to the mark halfway between 0 and 1. Here's a close-up of what your ruler should look like. You need a header with the author's last name and page number in the upper right corner of every page. The titles of longer works like books and magazine names should be italicized. Titles of shorter works like short stories, titles of journal articles, and song titles should be in quotation marks. If you use an in-text citation, you must have a works cited page. All entries on a works cited page have to be formatted with a hanging indent. This means the first line is flush with the left margin, and all subsequent lines are indented to 1/2 inch. To set up a hanging indent, on the ruler bar, move the guide to the halfway point between 0 and 1. Click on the top half of the guide and drag it back to 0. Here's a close-up of what your ruler should look like for a hanging indent. Don't use any contractions. No don'ts, can'ts, won'ts, shouldn'ts, etc. Write in third person. First person is when the speaker is a part of the story and uses the pronouns I, me, my, we, and our, among others. Second person is when the speaker addresses the reader directly and uses the pronouns you and yours. I'm speaking in second person right now. Academic writing is almost always in third person because that keeps the focus on the subject rather than the speaker or the audience. It uses the pronouns he, she, they, it, and them. The first page of an MLA paper should not have a title page. All the elements are double-spaced, even the heading, which includes your first and last name, your instructor's name, the course, and the date in the upper left corner. The title of your paper should be centered. Use standard capping without underlining, italics, quote marks, bold, or font that's larger than 12 points. In the upper right corner, create a header that is 1/2 inch from the top and 1 inch from the right edge. It should have your last name and the page number. It should also be in Times New Roman 12-point font. Microsoft's header template defaults to a different font, so be sure you look at the header font. To create the header, on the Insert tab's toolbar, click the down arrow under the Header tool. At the top of the drop-down menu, click Edit Header. This opens the Header and Footer Tools Design tab. First, let's set up automatic pagination. On the Design tab's toolbar, click the Page Number tool. On the drop-down menu, click Top of the Page. In the Simple window, select Plain Number 3. This automatically puts the page number for every page in the upper right corner. To add your last name to the header, with the cursor just to the left of the page number, type your last name. Please note that your last name is not last name as shown here in my example. Every year, someone turns in a paper for your name here or last name at least once. That kid does not deserve a grade for your work. Make sure to insert a space between the last letter of your name and the page number. To change the header's font, click the Home tab. Highlight your last name and the number in the header. Find the Font section of the toolbar and choose Times New Roman and 12. Here's an example of a paper I wrote in grad school. You can see my name, my professor's name, the course number, and the date. Notice the formatting of the date. In the upper right is the header with my last name and the page number. My title includes a song title, so I used quotation marks for that, but otherwise you shouldn't have any special characters in your own title. And the first line of every paragraph is indented a 1/2 inch. Now that you've gotten your paper's basic formatting set up, let's talk about embedding quotes. Embedding just means using a quote in your writing. Like everything else MLA, there are very specific rules about how to format a quote. You have to use a speaker tag followed by a comma, quotation marks, and the in-text citation goes in parentheses outside the closing quotation mark and is followed by the sentences in punctuation. In this example, the speaker tag is he writes, but it could also be something like she says or even according to Dylan or whoever. When I say exact wording, I mean word for word, letter by letter, commas, quotations, misspelled words, everything exactly as the source stated it. The quotation marks go immediately preceding the first word of the quote and immediately following the last word. For an embedded quote, the end punctuation, whether it's a comma or a period, does not go inside the quotation marks. The closing quote mark is followed by a space and the in-text citation in parentheses. There is no comma after the author's name. Immediately following the closing parentheses is the sentences in punctuation. One more thing about this particular example, it has a quote within a quote. In other words, the original source material included a quote, in this case from Bob Dylan. For a quote within a quote, change the quote marks in the source material to single quotes, as shown here. If you need to add a word or two to a quote to clarify its meaning, put your added word in brackets. Those are the squared off parentheses. In this example, I'm quoting Allen Ginsberg, who's relating something Bob Dylan told him. Ginsberg actually used the word he, but to clarify for the reader who was speaking, I added Dylan in brackets in place of Ginsberg's he. In the second line, I replaced the pronoun it with the title of the book Dylan was talking about. Sometimes you can leave out some of the original quote if it's not relevant, and you can do so without changing the meaning of the quote. In this case, you use ellipses to show this is not the source material author's whole thought, as shown in this example. Ideally, quotes should be short, not more than a sentence or two. However, once in a while, you may need a longer quote. If it's more than 4 lines, the formatting is completely different from a short quote. You indent the whole quote a ½ inch from the left margin, and you don't further indent the first line. Omit the quotation marks. Because there are no quotation marks, the final sentences in punctuation immediately follows the last word of the quote, and the in-text citation in parentheses follows the period. There's no other period after this kind of in-text citation. You shouldn't have more than 1 long quote per paper. Here's what a long quote looks like. Notice the first line is flush with the rest of the quote, which is indented a ½ inch. Here's the in-text citation, following the period at the end of the sentence, and without a period following it. Every paper that conforms to MLA guidelines looks exactly the same, every time. The goal of every writer is to communicate ideas clearly and effectively, and formatting is one of the tools that makes that easier. It may be hard to believe, but there's a lot more to MLA formatting than what we've covered here. For more information on MLA formatting, or just to see this information presented in a different format, go to the OWL website at owl.english.purdue.edu or the MLA Style Center at style.mla.org. There's even a condensed version of the MLA Style Guide in your textbook on pages 548 through 596. This presentation is based on the Purdue OWL's MLA 8th edition Formatting Style Guide. Thanks for watching.